What if the stories that shape our future aren't the ones shouted from podiums or trending on headlines? What if the real turning points begin in silence, in moments of quiet courage, ancestral memory, or whispered change? Did you know that India's community health workers contribute over 1 billion unpaid hours each year? That Bolivia is home to more than 4,000 native potato varieties, some older than the Inca Empire? Or that ancient Andean foot plows are still being used today, designed to work with mountain terrain better than modern machines? These aren't hypotheticals, they're not case studies, they're real stories of people who didn't wait for change, they became it. This is Radiant Reports, where we shine light on the good, because even in a noisy world, it's still the quietest moments that echo the loudest. On the 24th of March, 2025, in a small gathering under the soft sun in Kohima, Nagaland, a remote hill state in northeast India, a woman stepped forward, not to be praised, but to offer proof. Her name is Kenevonuo. She survived tuberculosis and chose to speak publicly for the first time. But to understand why that moment matters, we need to understand what tuberculosis really is. Tuberculosis, or TB, is a highly infectious disease caused by bacteria. It mainly affects the lungs and spreads through the air just by coughing or speaking. It's still one of the deadliest infectious diseases in the world today, but numbers alone can't show what it means to live through it and come out the other side.
Over 100 years ago, scientists developed the first and only vaccine for tuberculosis. We have tests to diagnose it and drugs that can cure it.
India alone accounts for over 25% of global TB cases. That's more than 2.4 million people each year. In places like Nagaland, steep hills, poor infrastructure, and social stigma make treatment even harder. Many people hide their symptoms, afraid of shame or isolation. To understand how this illness spreads and why it's still so dangerous, we need to see it in action.
Over 10 million people fall ill with tuberculosis, or TB for short, every year. About 1 in every 25 cases will be a drug-resistant strain of the disease, making it especially difficult, if not impossible, to treat and cure. In 2022, 1.3 million people died from TB. Let's put this in context. TB is the #1 deadliest infectious disease. It kills more people than malaria and HIV combined. And although COVID-19 briefly took the top spot for a few years, TB has once again reclaimed its deadly title.
Kenevonuo is an ASHA worker. That means she's a trained community-based health volunteer. ASHAs are often the only link between rural villages and formal healthcare. And when she herself contracted TB, she didn't hide. She followed the full 6-month treatment plan, even through weakness, side effects, and fear. But it wasn't just about the medicine. One afternoon, she sat outside her home and told her story, not at a clinic, not in a rally, just to her neighbour. That conversation rippled. Within a week, 2 more women quietly came to her, asking where they could get tested. A quiet confession became a community shift. She later said, "I had helped others through this, but when it was me, it felt like I had failed. It wasn't until I spoke out that I realised how powerful it could be."
To really understand this issue, we need to go further back an entire century. 100 years ago, the Bacille Calmette Guerin vaccine, commonly shortened to BCG, was invented. It played, and still plays, an important role in protecting children from the most deadly forms of TB. But for anyone older, the protection is limited. That's particularly important to note, because 9 in 10 cases worldwide are in adults and adolescents, not children.
For many, the hardest part isn't getting through treatment, it's saying the words out loud. Later, she spoke during a health campaign in public. Her recovery wasn't just survival, it was a catalyst for change. The word ASHA means hope in Hindi, but that hope is built on endurance. Most ASHA workers walk 10 to 15 kilometers a day, checking on patients, helping new mothers, delivering medicine. They're paid based on tasks, not hours. There's no salary, no job security. They also help identify what's called non-communicable diseases, long-term illnesses like diabetes, cancer, or high blood pressure. These are diseases that can't be passed from one person to another, but they now cause over 60% of deaths in India. Here's a historical note you might not know. The BCG vaccine used to prevent TB was developed over 100 years ago, and yet TB still kills over 1 million people a year. Medicine isn't enough. Equity matters.
The night sweats were worse. The fevers were worse. My trouble breathing was worse. I couldn't get upstairs. I couldn't do simple tasks. I lost a lot of weight. And I didn't feel like eating. I just felt tired all the time. I went to the hospital. They did a repeat x-ray, and I had TB. After they diagnosed me with TB, they intubated me because my lung had collapsed.
Around the world, equity still takes a backseat to politics, priorities, and funding. ASHAs aren't just assistants. They guide mothers through childbirth. They educate families on nutrition. They follow up with patients for weeks, sometimes months, to make sure treatment continues. They're everything in places where there's nothing else, but they're still seen as volunteers. A 2023 report estimated that ASHAs in India contribute over 1 billion hours of unpaid labour every year. That's worth over 3,000 crore rupees, around £280 million, and yet they still fight for basic protections, like gloves, insurance, and maternity leave. Few people realise this part of the story. During COVID, many ASHAs became the only lifeline for their villages. They worked as contact tracers, caregivers, and mental health supporters, all while earning less than £40 a month. Despite everything, Kenevonuo's decision to speak out made a difference. Testing rates in her district rose. Villages started participating in TB awareness campaigns, and by the end of 2024, several blocks in Nagaland were officially recognised as working toward TB-free status. 1. Woman's recovery sparked a shift across her district.
I would tell someone recently diagnosed with TB that they're not alone, that it's curable, and that they can get through it.
If you'd like to explore more, check out Survivors Against TB on YouTube, a survivor-led platform challenging stigma and sharing powerful personal stories. Visit the People's Archive of Rural India, or PARI, for in-depth reporting on rural life, including the work of ASHA workers across the country. And learn more about Operation ASHA, a grassroots non-profit bringing low-cost tuberculosis treatment to underserved communities in India and beyond. Kenevonuo didn't just recover from an illness, she helped dismantle a silence. Because sometimes, the person saving lives is the one you never even see. Healing doesn't always wear a stethoscope. Sometimes it wears an apron, or carries a basket of herbs. And here's something curious. Over 1,000 years ago, the Inca used a freeze-drying technique called charqui to preserve potatoes for decades in mountain caves. Preservation, it turns out, isn't just about food. It's about memory, survival, and sometimes cultural revival. The smell of stone-baked tubers fills the air. Clay ovens crackle, and in a narrow La Paz kitchen, hands move like memory, reconstructing flavours almost lost to time. This isn't just cooking, it's cultural preservation. In November 2024, Chef Marsia Taha opened her first solo restaurant, Arami, meaning shard of heaven in Guarani, an indigenous language of Bolivia. But Arami was never about fame. It was about reclaiming pride.
My name is Marsia Taha Mohammed, and I am the winner of the Latin America Best Female Chef Award, given by the 50 Best Restaurants 2024 list. My origins are Bolivian-Palestinian. I grew up in La Paz in a house full of women, aunts, cousins, and grandmother. My mom worked from when I was very young, so I was looked after by my grandmother. She was the one who showed me the local markets, street food, and introduced me to traditional flavors. Later, I grew up with my stepfather, who taught me to cook from a very young age. When I was finishing school, it was my mom who suggested I study gastronomy 17 years ago. And since then, to this day, I am proudly a chef.
For Marsia, that pride begins with the land and the flavours it still remembers. Bolivia is one of the most biodiverse countries in the world, yet its rich culinary heritage has been marginalised by global food systems and foreign imports. Over time, ingredients once revered by indigenous communities were dismissed as outdated or unprofitable. A 2021 report found that more than 60% of indigenous smallholder farmers had lost access to local markets due to industrial food chains. Generations grew up disconnected from their roots, often ashamed of the very foods that once sustained their ancestors. But today, some of those forgotten ingredients are returning to the table, with stories simmering alongside them.
Being chosen from so many talented Latin American chefs fills me with pride and responsibility. Arami means little piece of heaven in Guarani. This restaurant is a tribute to my love for the rainforest and the lowland Amazonian lands. My cooking aims to transport people into the ecosystem with its diverse fruits, roots, and Amazonian proteins. We want to share stories of my Bolivia through this little piece of heaven.
Marsia, trained in classical European cuisine, turned away from prestige to walk the highland paths of her ancestors. In 2018, she co-founded Sabores Silvestres Wild Flavors, a collaborative project uniting chefs, agronomists, scientists, and indigenous communities. Together, they travel to over 50 rural regions, cataloguing heirloom ingredients and reviving endangered cooking techniques. But her most powerful lesson came not in the kitchen, but in the quiet gratitude of those she cooked for. At times, Marsia's mission was met with skepticism. Some said indigenous food wouldn't appeal to diners. Others warned she was chasing a nostalgic fantasy. But one moment changed everything. In a remote village, an elderly woman cried after watching her childhood recipe, made with wild tawi beans, served to guests as fine dining. That's when Marsia realized she wasn't just preserving recipes. She was preserving dignity, and with that, her mission shifted from revival to resistance.
And at the same time, it's a nod to Bolivia, a celebration of all our beautiful aspects, our cultural diversity, our biodiversity in products, ecosystems, and all this that lets me craft a cuisine that inspires me and that I've been working on.
Marsia's work blends gastronomy with anthropology, ecology, and indigenous knowledge. By partnering with rural elders and scientists, she helped position eco-gastronomy as a tool for conservation and community resilience. Her program empowered over 300 rural producers, bringing native crops like oca and koshuro algae into the spotlight. Take oca, for instance. It's a sweet, colourful Andean root that thrives in cold conditions and stores for months without refrigeration. Farmers have used it for generations to survive harsh winters, even when nothing else would grow. And then there's the paiche fish, a freshwater giant from the Amazon that can grow up to 3 meters long. Its flesh is nutty and dense, packed with nutrients. Until recently, it was virtually unknown outside the region. These ingredients, once overlooked, are now being celebrated. Did you know some Bolivian farmers still use the chaquitacla, a traditional Andean foot plough that dates back over 1,000 years? Unlike modern machinery, it's designed for mountainous terrain, allowing smallholder farmers to work the land without damaging soil or water. Many of the farmers Marsia partners with still pass it down, generation by generation. But the challenges aren't just culinary, they're systemic. Bolivia's food infrastructure suffers from poor roads, lack of refrigeration, and market exclusion. Government schemes often prioritize exportable crops, not ancestral ones. And industrial agriculture continues to displace traditional growers. That's why Marsia doesn't just source ethically, she builds fair trade networks, ensuring that indigenous growers receive recognition, income, and dignity.
I think that when you try my cooking, you need to come with an open mind because you'll find not only new flavors, but also new ingredients. And among those new ingredients, you might come across a lizard tail or an insect, but I'll never serve anything that isn't usually eaten.
And the impact? It's tangible. Young chefs are traveling into the rainforest to learn forgotten recipes. Farmers once ignored by urban markets are now suppliers for top kitchens. And Bolivians, young and old, are reclaiming pride in their plates. Marsia has sparked a cultural renaissance, reminding people that their food isn't just nourishment, it's memory, identity, resistance, and for the next generation, that memory is becoming a movement.
These past 4 years, we've researched a lot, exploring indigenous communities where these resources are kept, often not reaching cities, but preserved by indigenous communities through their consumption and transformation. So what my kitchen aims to do is bring these foods, this culture, these techniques and landscapes into my cooking, to share what happens in these places.
The chef also highlighted the importance of ancient techniques like freeze-drying tubers in the highlands and using unique Amazonian ingredients like tuyu larvae or big-bottomed ants.
If you'd like to learn more, follow these real voices, Marsia Taha on Instagram, for behind-the-scenes glimpses into Bolivia's culinary revival and her work with indigenous communities. Gustu Restaurant, a Bolivian kitchen pioneering sustainable gastronomy, where Marsia's journey first gained global attention. And for broader context on Latin American food heritage, check out Latin America in Focus, a podcast sharing stories of culture, land, and innovation from across the region. Marsia didn't just open a restaurant, she reopened a conversation between land and memory, between science and story. So next time you try something unfamiliar, ask, who grew it? Whose voice does it carry? When we support sustainable food systems, we're not just eating better, we're restoring a relationship. Just as food can revive memory and regenerate land, it can also reawaken something even deeper, our sense of belonging and In a world where ancestral knowledge is often dismissed as obsolete, Marsia's journey reminds us not everything old is outdated. Some of it is wisdom, some of it is science, and some of it might just be the blueprint for our survival, which raises the question, how much of the future is already here, hidden in plain sight, in kitchens, in forests, in forgotten recipes? Some stories echo louder in silence. Did you know NASA is studying ancient Andean farming systems to build more resilient soil models for space colonization? That the BCG vaccine, first developed over a century ago, is still given to over 100 million infants every single year, and that India's ASHA workers walk the equivalent of the Earth's circumference every 3 days. Without formal pay, that's not just quiet power, that's impact. And it deserves recognition, rights, and the respect it's long been denied. If any of these stories stayed with you, explore more through these independent voices. TB Proof, a global network of survivors and doctors working to end tuberculosis, stigma, and inequality. Rural Women's Assembly, a grassroots movement amplifying rural women's food sovereignty across the global south. People's Archive of Rural India, powerful storytelling from India's rural communities in their own voices. Slow Food Youth Network, a movement of young changemakers reimagining food justice and heritage preservation. Agroecology Fund, supporting farmer-led innovation and environmental justice through agroecological knowledge systems. Indigenous Food Lab, a native-led culinary initiative restoring traditional food knowledge in Indigenous communities. If something sparked your curiosity, follow it. If something softened your heart, remember it. And if something called you to act, don't wait. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and share Radiant Reports with someone who might need a little light today. Thanks for joining me here on Radiant Reports. Keep questioning, stay curious, and most of all, take care.